Chapter 1. He was 170 days dying and not yet dead. He fought for survival with the passion of a beast in a trap. He was delirious and rotting, but occasionally his primitive mind emerged from the burning nightmare of survival into something resembling sanity. Then he lifted his mute face to eternity and muttered, "What's the matter, me? Help, you goddamn gods! Help is all." Blasphemy came easily to him. It was half his speech all his life. He had been raised in the gutter school of the 25th century and spoke nothing but the gutter tongue. Of all brutes in the world, he was among the least valuable alive and most likely to survive. So he struggled and prayed in blasphemy, but occasionally his raveling mind leaped backward 30 years to his childhood and remembered a nursery jingle. "Gully Foyle is my name, and Terra is my nation. Deep space is my dwelling place, and death's my destination." He was Gulliver Foyle, mechanics mate third class, 30 years old, big-boned and rough, and 170 days adrift in space. He was Gully Foyle, the oiler, wiper, bankerman. Too easy for trouble, too slow for fun, too empty for friendship, too lazy for love. The lethargic outlines of his character showed in the official merchant marine records. Foyle, Gulliver, AS-128/127:006. Education, none. Skills, none. Merits, none. Recommendations, none. Personal comments: a man of physical strength and intellectual potential stunted by lack of ambition. Energizes at minimum. The stereotype common man. Some unexpected shock might possibly awaken him, but psych cannot find the key. Not recommended for promotion. Has reached a dead end. He had reached a dead end. He had been content to drift from moment to moment of existence for 30 years like some heavily armored creature, sluggish and indifferent. Gully Foyle, the stereotype common man. But now he was adrift in space for 170 days, and the key to his awakening was in the lock. Presently, it would turn and open the door to Holocaust. The spaceship Nomad drifted halfway between Mars and Jupiter. Whatever war catastrophe had wrecked it had taken a sleek steel rocket 100 yards long and 100 feet broad and mangled it into a skeleton on which was mounted the remains of cabins, holds, decks, and bulkheads. Great rents in the hull were blazes of light on the sun side and frosty blotches of stars on the dark side. The SS Nomad was a weightless emptiness of blinding sun and jet shadow, frozen and silent. The wreck was filled with a floating conglomerate of frozen debris that hung within the destroyed vessel like an instantaneous photograph of an explosion. The minute gravitational attraction of the bits of rubble for each other was slowly drawing them into clusters which were periodically torn apart by the passage through them of the one survivor still alive on the wreck, Gulliver Foyle, AS-128/127:006. He lived in the only airtight room left intact in the wreck, a tool locker off the main deck corridor. The locker was 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and 9 feet high. It was the size of a giant's coffin. 600 years before, it had been judged the most exquisite oriental torture to imprison a man in a cage that size for a few weeks. Yet Foyle had existed in this lightless coffin for 5 months, 20 days, and 4 hours. "Who are you?" "Gully Foyle is my name." "Where are you from?" "Terra is my nation." "Where are you now?" "Deep space is my dwelling place." "Where are you bound?" "Death's my destination." On the 171st day of his fight for survival, Foyle answered these questions and awoke. His heart hammered and his throat burned. He groped in the dark for the air tank which shared his coffin with him and checked it. The tank was empty. Another would have to be moved in at once. So this day would commence with an extra skirmish with death, which Foyle accepted with mute endurance. He felt through the locker shelves and located a torn space suit. It was the only one aboard Nomad, and Foyle no longer remembered where or how he had found it. He had sealed the tear with emergency spray, but had no way of refilling or replacing the empty oxygen cartridges on the back. Foyle got into the suit. It would hold enough air from the locker to allow him 5 minutes in vacuum. No more. Foyle opened the locker door and plunged out into the black frost of space. The air in the locker puffed out with him, and its moisture congealed into a tiny cloud that drifted down the torn main deck corridor. Foyle heaved at the exhausted air tank, floated it out of the locker, and abandoned it. 1 minute was gone. He turned and propelled himself through the floating debris toward the hatch to the ballast hold. He did not run. His gait was the unique locomotion of freefall and weightlessness, thrusts with foot, elbow and hand against deck, wall and corner, a slow motion darting through space like a bat flying under water. Foyle shot through the hatch into the dark side ballast hold. 2 minutes were gone. Like all spaceships, Nomad was ballasted and stiffened, with the mass of her gas tanks laid down the length of her keel like a long lumber raft tapped at the sides by a labyrinth of pipe fittings. Foyle took a minute disconnecting an air tank. He had no way of knowing whether it was full or already exhausted, whether he would fight it back to his locker only to discover that it was empty and his life was ended. Once a week he endured this game of space roulette. There was a roaring in his ears. The air in his spacesuit was rapidly going foul. He yanked the massy cylinder toward the ballast hatch, ducked to let it sail over his head, then thrust himself after it. He swung the tank through the hatch. 4 minutes had elapsed, and he was shaking and blacking out. He guided the tank down the main deck corridor and bolted into the tool locker. He slammed the locker door, dogged it, found a hammer on a shelf, and swung it thrice against the frozen tank to loosen the valve. Foyle twisted the handle grimly. With the last of his strength, he unsealed the helmet of his spacesuit, lest he suffocate within the suit while the locker filled with air, if this tank contained air. He fainted, as he had fainted so often before, never knowing whether this was death. Who are you? Gully Foyle. Where are you from? Terra. Where are you now? Space. Where are you bound? He awoke. He was alive. He wasted no time on prayer or thanks, but continued the business of survival. In the darkness, he explored the locker shelves where he kept his rations. There were only a few packets left. Since he was already wearing the patched spacesuit, he might just as well run the gauntlet of vacuum again and replenish his supplies. He flooded his spacesuit with air from the tank, resealed his helmet, and sailed out into the frost and light again. He squirmed down the main deck corridor and ascended the remains of a stairway to control deck, which was no more than a roofed corridor in space. Most of the walls were destroyed. With the sun on his right and the stairs on his left, Foyle shot aft toward the galley storeroom. Halfway down the corridor, he passed a door frame still standing foursquare between deck and roof. The leaf still hung on its hinges, half open, a door to nowhere. Behind it was all space and the steady stars. As Foyle passed the door, he had quick view of himself reflected in the polished chrome of the leaf. Gully Foyle, a giant black creature, bearded, crusted with dried blood and filth, emaciated with sick, patient eyes, and followed always by a stream of floating debris, the raffle disturbed by his motion and following him through space like the tail of a festering comet. Foyle turned into the galley storeroom and began looting with the methodical speed of 5 months' habit. Most of the bottled goods were frozen solid and exploded. Much of the canned goods had lost their containers, for tin crumbles to dust in the absolute zero of space. Foyle gathered up ration packets, concentrates, and a chunk of ice from the burst water tank. He threw everything into a large copper cauldron, turned and darted out of the storeroom, carrying the cauldron. At the door to nowhere, Foyle glanced at himself again, reflected in the chrome leaf frame and the stars. Then he stopped his motion in bewilderment. He stared at the stars behind the door, which had become familiar friends after 5 months. There was an intruder among them, a comet, it seemed, with an invisible head and a short, spurting tail. Then Foyle realized he was staring at a spaceship, stern rockets flaring as it accelerated on a sunward course which must pass him. "No," he muttered. "No, man. No." He was continually suffering from hallucinations. He turned to resume the journey back to his coffin. Then he looked again. It was still a spaceship, stern rockets flaring as it accelerated on a sunward course which must pass him. He discussed the illusion with eternity. 6 months already," he said in his gutter tongue. Is it now? You listen to me, lousy God's eye talking a deal is all. I look again, sweet prayer, man. If it's a ship, I'm yours. You own me. But if it's a gaff, man, if it's no ship, I unseal right now and blow my guts. We both ballast level us. Now reach me the sign, yes or no is all. He looked for a third time. For the third time, he saw a spaceship, stern rockets flaring as it accelerated on a sunward course, which must pass him. It was the sign. He believed. He was saved. Foyle shoved off and went hurtling down control deck corridor toward the bridge. But at the companionway stairs, he restrained himself. He could not remain conscious for more than a few more moments without refilling his spacesuit. He gave the approaching spaceship one pleading look, then shot down to the tool locker and pumped his suit full. He mounted on the control bridge. Through the starboard observation port, he saw the spaceship, stern rockets still flaring, evidently making a major alteration in course, for it was bearing down on him very slowly. On a panel marked Flares, Foyle pressed the distress button. There was a 3-second pause during which he suffered. Then white radiance blinded him as the distress signal went off in 3 triple bursts, 9 prayers for help. Foyle pressed the button twice again, and twice more the flares flashed in space, while the radioactives incorporated in their combustion set up a static howl that must register on any waveband of any receiver. The stranger's jets cut off. He had been seen. He would be saved. He was reborn. He exulted. Foyle darted back to his locker and replenished his spacesuit again. He began to weep. He started to gather his possessions, a faceless clock which he kept wound just to listen to the ticking, a lug wrench with a hand-shaped handle which he would hold in lonely moments, an egg slicer upon whose wires he would pluck primitive tunes. He dropped them in his excitement, hunted for them in the dark, then began to laugh at himself. He filled his spacesuit with air once more, and capered back to the bridge. He punched a flare button labeled Rescue. From the hull of the Nomad shot a sunlit that burst and hung, flooding miles of space with harsh white light. "Come on, baby, you," Foyle crooned. "Hurry up, man. Come on, baby you." Like a ghost torpedo, the stranger slid into the outermost rim of the light, approaching slowly, looking him over. For a moment, Foyle's heart constricted. The ship was behaving so cautiously that he feared she was an enemy vessel from the outer satellites. Then he saw the famous red and blue emblem on her side, the trademark of the mighty industrial clan of Prestane of Terra, powerful, munificent, beneficent. And he knew this was a sister ship, for the Nomad was also Preston-owned. He knew this was an angel from space hovering over him. "Sweet sister," Foyle crooned, "baby angel, fly away home with me." The ship came abreast of Foyle, illuminated ports along its side glowing with friendly light, its name and registry number clearly visible in illuminated figures on the hull. Vorga, T-1339. The ship was alongside him in a moment, passing him in a second, disappearing in a third. The sister had spurned him. The angel had abandoned him. Foyle stopped dancing and crooning. He stared in dismay. He leaped to the flare panel and slapped buttons. Distress signals, landing, takeoff, and quarantine flares burst from the hull of the Nomad in a madness of white, red, and green light, pulsing, pleading. And Vorga T-1339 passed silently and implacably, stern jets flaring again as it accelerated on a sunward course. So, in 5 seconds, he was born, he lived, and he died. After 30 years in existence and 6 months of torture, Gully Foyle, the stereotyped common man, was no more. The key turned in the lock of his soul, and the door was opened. What emerged expunged the common man forever. "You pass me by," he said with slow, mounting fury. "You leave me to rot like a dog. You leave me die, Vorga. Vorga T-1339. No! I get out of here, me. I follow you, Vorga. I find you, Vorga. I pay you back, me. I rot you. I kill you, Vorga. I kill you, filthy." The acid of fury ran through him, eating away the brute patience and sluggishness that had made a cipher of Gully Foyle, precipitating a chain of reactions that would make an infernal machine of Gully Foyle. He was dedicated. "Vorga, I kill you, filthy." He did what the cipher could not do. he rescued himself. For 2 days he combed the wreckage in 5-minute forays, and devised a harness for his shoulders. He attached an air tank to the harness and connected the tank to his spacesuit helmet with an improvised hose. He wriggled through space like an ant dragging a log, but he had the freedom of the Nomad for all time. He thought. In the control bridge, he taught himself to use the few navigation instruments that were still unbroken, studying the standard manuals that littered the wreck navigation room. In the 10 years of his service in space, he had never dreamed of attempting such a thing, despite the rewards of promotion and pay, but now he had Vorga T-1339 to reward him. He took sights. The Nomad was drifting in space on the ecliptic 300 million miles from the Sun. Before him were spread the constellations Perseus, Andromeda, and Pisces. Hanging almost in the foreground was a dusty orange spot that was Jupiter, distinctly a planetary disk to the naked eye. With any luck, he could make a course for Jupiter and rescue. Jupiter could never be habitable, like all the other outer planets beyond the asteroid orbits. It was a frozen mass of methane and ammonia, but its 4 largest satellites swarmed with cities and populations now at war with the inner planets. He would be a war prisoner, but he had to stay alive to settle accounts with Vorga T-1339. Foyle inspected the engine room of the Nomad. There was high-thrust fuel remaining in the tanks, and one of the 4 tail jets was still in operative condition. Foyle found the engine room manuals and studied them. He repaired the connection between fuel tanks and the 1-jet chamber. The tanks were on the sun side of the wreck and warmed above freezing point. The high thrust was still liquid, but it would not flow. In free fall, there was no gravity to draw the fuel down the pipes. Foyle studied a space manual and learned something about theoretical gravity. If he could put the Nomad into a spin, centrifugal force would impart enough gravitation to the ship to draw fuel down into the combustion chamber of the jet. If he could fire the combustion chamber, the unequal thrust of the 1 jet would impart a spin to the Nomad. But he couldn't fire the jet without first having the spin, and he couldn't get the spin without first having the jet. He thought his way out of the deadlock. He was inspired by Vorga. Foyle opened the drainage petcock to the combustion chamber of the jet and tortuously filled the chamber with fuel by hand. He had primed the pump. Now, if he ignited the fuel, it would fire long enough to impart the spin and start gravity. Then the flow from the tanks would commence and the rocketing would continue. He tried matches. Matches will not burn in the vacuum of space. He tried flint and steel. Sparks will not glow in the absolute zero of space. He thought of red-hot filaments. He had no electric power of any description aboard the Nomad to make a filament red-hot. He found texts and read. Although he was blacking out frequently and close to complete collapse, he thought and planned. He was inspired to greatness by Vorga. Foyle brought ice from the frozen galley tanks, melted it with his own body heat, and added water to the jet combustion chamber. The fuel and the water were non-miscible. They did not mix. The water floated in a thin layer over the fuel. From the chemical stores, Foyle brought a silvery bit of wire, pure sodium metal. He poked the wire through the open petcock. The sodium ignited when it touched the water and flared with high heat. The heat touched off the high thrust, which burst in a needle flame from the petcock. Foyle closed the petcock with a wrench. The ignition held in the chamber, and the lone aft jet slammed out flame with a soundless vibration that shook the ship. The off-center thrust of the jet twisted the Nomad into a slow spin. The torque imparted a slight gravity. Weight returned. The floating debris that cluttered the hull fell to decks, walls, and ceilings, and the gravity kept the fuel feeding from tanks to combustion chamber. Foyle wasted no time on cheers. He left the engine room and struggled forward in desperate haste for a final, fatal observation from the control bridge. This would tell him whether the Nomad was committed to a wild plunge out into the no return of deep space, or a course for Jupiter and rescue. The slight gravity made his air tank almost impossible to drag. The sudden forward surge of acceleration shook loose masses of debris which flew backward through the Nomad. As Foyle struggled up the companionway stairs to the control deck, the rubble from the bridge came hurtling back down the corridor and smashed into him. He was caught up in this tumbleweed in space, rolled back the length of the empty corridor, and brought up against the galley bulkhead with an impact that shattered his last hold on consciousness. He lay pinned in the center of a half-ton of wreckage, helpless, barely alive, but still raging for vengeance. Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you now? Where are you bound?